The 2000s was a very unique time in video games.
Are you sure?
And some modern games kind of harken back to it. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanx, 10 modern games with 2000s game vibes. So let's start off with number 10, Dead Island 2. So this game was trapped in development hell for like 10 years. They switched developers several times, got completely rebooted more than once, and you'd think after all that the final product would be a Duke Nukem Forever style disaster, or if not that, something like Homefront The Revolution, where it had a tortured development cycle, ended up being pretty bad. And that comparison is pretty apt because Dambuster Studios made Homefront before they made this game, and I guess attempting to rescue games in mid-development is just their thing or something, I don't know. Thankfully, Dead Island 2 ended up being a lot better than expected. It performs well, it's pretty fun to play, the humor is not as obnoxious as you would think from the pre-release material, and it's, like I said, video gamey. The funny thing is, even though this is a sequel to a 2011 game, Dead Island 2 feels closer to a 2000s game than even the original does. The open world environments are smaller, it's more linear, the RPG elements are downplayed, they're replaced with a simplified perk system. It somehow feels more old school than the original game, which has more in common with Techland's Dying Light games, which makes sense because they made those after Dead Island. While Dead Island 2 simplifies things in a lot of ways, I think it actually improves the experience. There's less travel time exploring these sprawling environments, everything's compact and punchy, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's certainly not the most groundbreaking game, but it's a solid romp with friends that looks great and runs smoothly. I don't know why it's called Dead Island. It's set in LA, it's not, on an island, but whatever.
Open up. I'll take him on.
Are you sure?
Take the gun. You might need it. Just don't pass out.
Oh my God! Let me out!
Give me that. Wish me luck.
At number 9 is Evil West, a 2022 action game from Flying Wild Hog, the guys behind the recent Shadow Warrior games. This game is a glorified throwback to old school action games. It's also very deliberately aping a more modern sort of game, the God of War reboot. The controls and certain elements of the combat are straight out of Sony Santa Monica's playbook, but the structure of the game is 100% old school. This game may use Old Man Kratos as a starting point, but by the end you've got a full arsenal of weapons and gadgets unlocked. It feels closer to a character action game or a spectacle fighter, or whatever you want to call the premier sort of action games we got before everyone wanted to make Souls-likes. And the mission design is what really makes this game feel particularly old school. It's relentlessly linear and rigid with how you can progress. There's the occasional hidden chest off the beaten path or an optional encounter or two, but it's not like more modern games where they offer the illusion of openness, at least. There's not a million collectibles or side quests to bog things down. You just do a mission, fight a bunch of monsters, maybe take on a boss, and it's back to the base to get an upgrade. It does take a few hours to really get off the ground, but once you start getting a lot of the really fun powers and guns, the game's potential really starts revealing itself. It's a game we've been championing for a while here now at GameRanx, and it's not going to be for everyone. I'm not going to lie and say, everybody is going to enjoy this game. Sometimes the level design is also a hurdle there, but if you're just looking for some solid fun, Evil West has got it in spades. And number 8 is RoboCop Rogue City. Now, with modern shooters, there tends to be some kind of gimmick to get people's attention. Either they're Call of Duty-style affairs, Doom Eternal-style action games disguised as shooters, or the many flavors of 90s nostalgia boomer shooters, but you rarely get something like RoboCop Rogue City, which directly channels the mid-2000s licensed game boom. Like, think about it. When did the last actually noteworthy RoboCop game come out? It was back in 2003. Now, it was a Titus game and it sucked, but the DNA for Rogue City was right there. What makes Rogue City so unique compared to other shooters is that you're basically a walking tank. You're slow, you don't need to take cover, and you got a big pistol with infinite ammo. The levels in this game aren't areas like in other FPS games. They're basically shooting galleries. You slowly march forward, and guys jump out of cover, basically for you to mercilessly eviscerate in the name of justice. It might sound brainless, and yeah, it is, but it's really satisfying. You just feel unstoppable, and when they hit the RoboCop theme, it's amazing. I gotta compliment the destructible environments too. You straight up annihilate just everything in your path. It's awesome. There are a lot of modern features. There's a skill tree, certain levels that are hubs where you do side quests and talk to people and perform investigations. In those parts of the game, it feels a little more like an RPG than an old school shooter. But when they throw all that out and just let you go nuts, that's when the game shines and when it feels like a very old school game.
Come on, boys. Let's finish up here and show them what it means to be a team player. Push! You can't fall behind!
At number 7 is Man-Eater. This thing's pure 2000s era nostalgia. The gimmicky premise, the sociopathic violence portrayed with a wink, the goofy jokes, feels like a game from 2005 remade in 2020. Now, for a game about playing as a rampaging shark, there's some ambitious ideas here, which in a way is also kind of quaint and old school. You got that experimental streak you see in early 3D games, but refined so it's actually fun. You start off the game as a baby shark in shallow water and slowly evolve into a man-eating menace on a quest for revenge against the hunter that killed your mama. Yeah, that's right. You're Bambi if Bambi was a rampaging shark. The framing device is this fictional reality show about a shark hunter where the gameplay is narrated like a nature documentary. It's all firmly tongue-in-cheek.
The bioweapon has reached America's shores, perhaps having already unleashed a rapid viral agent upon the citizenry. Now, the NWO will hold the country ransom, offering the vaccine in exchange for products.
It manages to hit the right tone, goofy without trying too hard to be funny, and there's some great ideas. Not to tell you it's like a perfect game or anything. I mean, after a few hours, you've pretty much seen everything you're gonna get, and if you keep playing, you're just gonna do more of it. You eat fish, smash boats, chomp on some swimmers, rinse and repeat. There's not a lot of gameplay variety, but the stuff you do is mostly pretty fun, and the environmental design is actually great with the little Easter eggs they sprinkle all over the place. It's all fun. That's the game. Maybe it's a little tedious, a little repetitive at times, but in a way that makes it feel old school as well. It's not bursting with activities to keep you engaged. It's a game that does one thing and does it relatively well. Sometimes that's what a game needs to be. This is one of those times.
What are these? My guess is powerful influencing machines, designed to make us hate America and love India. The influencing machine is destroyed. Americans, freed from its spell, will forsake their philosophy for good old-fashioned cheeseburgers.
At number 6 is Way of the Hunter. If you were a console gamer in the 2000s, then the trend may have completely passed you by, but at the turn of the millennium, hunting games were absolutely huge. The Deer Hunter games and the Cabela games were Call of Duty before there was Call of Duty. These things got yearly releases, and they were always big sellers in their particular market. They weren't exactly great games or anything, but they offered something a lot of other games didn't, which is a simulation of hunting, where careful tracking and practice for precise aim, it's all really much more important than twitch reflexes. These are real different kinds of FPS games, and the idea behind them was sound, but the execution left a fair amount to be desired. There was an audience for hunting games, but it wasn't until recently we started to get some decent ones with like The Hunter, Call of the Wild, and Way of the Hunter. just making a hunting game at all feels old school in some ways, even though they're really just a continuation of stuff like Truck Simulator and Farming Simulator, games which are slow-paced and fun for casual and hardcore enthusiasts alike. Way the Hunter has some impressive forests, and the hunting is appropriately challenging, but in a few ways it's a little more accessible than The Hunter. It's a game that you can play just for the nature walks if you really want to, or bone up on hunting without having to get up at 5 in the morning and stand around in 20-degree weather, because that's what it's like if you've ever done it. And number 5 is Terminator Resistance. Before RoboCop, the same developer made Terminator, and it was surprisingly decent. The Terminator franchise doesn't have a great track record. There were those Bethesda games in the 90s that were groundbreaking in some ways, but that's about as far as, actually good games went, I guess. So Resistance, a movie tie-in game coming out in 2019 from Teon, a developer whose catalog up to that point was just shovelware junk, had no chance at all. But the game that actually came out was not bad at all. It was definitely old school. Some might say a little outdated. I would call it charmingly janky, I think. The next game, RoboCop Rogue City, was definitely the more polished experience, but Terminator had it where it counts. The Terminators were finally scary again, for one. And the way the game kind of felt like a more focused Fallout game was pretty smart. Each major location was kind of a mini open world area you could explore. One might call it open zone. It had side quests, you could gather resources for weapon upgrades. The game actually made upgrades feel like they mattered too. Certain weapons were required to damage certain Terminators, etc., etc. At first, the Terminator is just untouchable, but by the end of the game, you're mowing them down like little leaves of grass. Legitimately, it's empowering when you finally unlock the laser weapons to take on the machines directly. Just the fact it's a movie franchise game makes it feel old school in some ways, but in contrast to all those games in the 2000s that were terrible, this one's actually pretty good. As long as you're willing to overlook some stiff controls, and to be fair, they're not the worst, but you'll notice it. And the voice acting is less than stellar. But if you get past that stuff, there's a lot to like here. At number 4 is Alone in the Dark from last year. Now, we did not say these were going to exclusively be good games. Some 2000 games vibes were not necessarily great. The new Alone in the Dark, it's a janky one. It's also pretty darn short, and it never really feels great per se, but if it's got anything, it's got vibes to spare. It is a throwback survival horror game through and through. It's got the modern camera, but beyond that, it's exactly what you would expect from a mid-2000s horror game that's not called Resident Evil or Silent Hill. It does feel a little off compared to its more polished competitors, but it still has its charms. Like, the puzzles are mostly pretty fun. The story is intriguingly weird. The experience itself, it's kind of mediocre, but the presentation of the story is what makes it work. It's just quirky and odd enough to keep you going until the ridiculous final act. The game's full of oddball little secrets and Easter eggs, which also feel super old school as well. Just unlocking the alternate endings is the sort of thing you'd see in an old horror game, and it works. It's a game that does grab your attention despite its flaws. I can see why it did ultimately fail, because as a game it's nothing special, but as a vehicle to watch David Harbour awkwardly interact with a bunch of weirdos and have no idea what's going on, it's actually great. That alone makes it feel pretty old school. I mean, how many games ever have celebrity voice acting anymore? That sort of thing was everywhere in the 2000s, and it's gone now.
Are you ready to tell me what happened in the attic? I put a rope around my neck, and then I strangled all the life from my body. Are you under the impression that you died? Yes. No. I was supposed to die.
What does that mean? That you were supposed to die?
I'm the catalyst. I had to die to make the story happen.
30 years ago, Frederic needed me to die.
You're not making any sense, Jeremy. Come back. Find your focus.
Hey! I cheated everyone. I didn't play my part.
Hey!
I escaped
Hey!
my doom. My destiny.
Again, find your focus.
Hey, I'm right here. What the hell is going on?
Now everything is wrong. Nothing is in
Hey!
place.
I'm right here!
And number 3 is Psychonauts 2. The original Psychonauts is one of the most of-its-time games ever, at least that manages to hold up still. The art style, the humor, the action platformer gameplay, the psychic powers. Oh, the 2000s loved psychic powers. Everything about it feels rooted in 2005. So, no surprise, the follow-up from 2021 manages to retain most of those vibes. The Invader Zim art style is still there, the slightly dark sense of humor. Hell, the voice cast feels like a 2000-era nostalgia revival. So many voices in this game I remember hearing a lot as a kid. While collectathons were mostly dead by 2005, the sort of platforming we got in Psychonauts 2 was still in vogue. It was less about big open stages full of doodads to collect and more about a few major collectibles spread around, and the levels were a little more linear. They had their own unique gimmick, and that's kind of what made these games work. And while the sequel is not quite as wildly creative as the first, it does feel better to actually play. It doesn't have the annoying difficulty spikes of the original. It's impressive that Psychonauts 2 manages to stay so close to the spirit of the first game, even though it came out 15 years later. Usually when you get these kind of nostalgia revivals, they feel off. Or if they are able to recreate the vibes, the gameplay suffers from being too rooted in the past. But this game manages to thread the needle. It's both reverent to the original while still being a fun, modern game in the ways that you kind of need, like the more utility-oriented ways that you might expect a game to be different over that period of time. Yeah, like you can enjoy this game even if you have no nostalgia for the original.
That's right, Raz. No more
And number 2 is Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. The original Space Marine came out in 2011, so it's not exactly 2000s era, but it's close enough. And you got to admit, even though that game technically came out in the 2010s, the spirit was of that of a 2000s game. Like, what's more 2000s is playing as a walking tank in a grimdark world blown away hordes of monsters with oversized guns. Gears of War came out in 2006. It defined third-person shooters for a while, and well, Space Marine isn't a Gears ripoff. There wouldn't be a Space Marine without Gears. Like, it definitely lives in the shadow, but it's its own thing. So if there's one way to describe Space Marine 2, it's that it's pleasingly old school in its approach. There's no live service nonsense, no separate launchers for its different game modes, no single player only focus like a lot of these games have. It's got 3 fully featured game modes that come packed as a single complete game. I like that. I can't believe something that simple is worth being nostalgic over, but that's just where we're at. Getting something like this with a 10-ish hour campaign, a multiplayer mode, and a co-op mode feels special because games tend to go all in on one thing anymore rather than give you several options for letting players decide what they want to do. Gameplay is old school too, just a lot of stomping around and blasting everything that moves, while also having some innovative ideas like how it incorporates melee combat into the shooting. It's not groundbreaking, but what they've done here, it does feel good to play, and that's really what matters most.
Another one dead.
And at number 1 is Captain Blood. The vibes cannot get more 2000s than this game, for one simple reason. It's literally a game from the 2000s coming out in 2025. The story behind this thing is nuts. It was originally meant to come out in 2006 on the original Xbox. It got pushed back to the 360 and eventually got canceled even though the game was essentially finished. There's a whole lot more to the story, but what matters is that this is an honest-to-God 2000s era game that is finally coming out, and let me tell you, it is the most 2000s game maybe ever. It's got God of War, and I mean original God of War style combat. It's got turret sections, low poly, scantily clad women in the first minute, a blowhard hero hero who's too cool for school. Playing this game feels like stepping into a portal to the late 2000s in the best possible way. I mean, the game might actually be terrible. I don't know. All we have to go on is this demo. It does have its full release in May, but the 2000s era energy in this thing is just off the charts. Most games actually from the aughts feel less 2000s than Captain Blood. And I don't know about you, but I'm here for it. Speaking of what you think, leave us a comment and let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter and book me on Cameo at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.